Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Greetings from Ramallah, Palestine. My name is Wissam Ahmed from Al-Haq, the first Palestinian human rights organization. I will be presenting on the situation in Palestine, specifically in relation to the issue of business and human rights, and the role that businesses have played in the colonization of Palestine over the history of the struggle for Palestine. I will start with an overview of the question of Palestine and how it fits within the broader context. You have to recognize that the Palestinian question falls within the broader geopolitical context of imperialism and the history of colonialism and the colonization of Palestine prior to World War I and the colonial occupation of Palestine that we see today. And the focus of the presentation is going to be on the present context that we have today within the Palestinian context. And I want to share with you a couple of videos to give you that context, and then go on with my presentation, and then continue with questions from there. And I know time is limited, so I'll try to go as quickly as possible between hopefully you can hear my video now.
Al-Haq's virtual field visit on the annexation wall and its associated regime. The Green Line is the Welcome to Al-Haq's virtual field visit on the annexation wall and its associated regime. The Green Line is the 1967 border, which is internationally accepted as the boundary between Israel and the occupied Palestinian territory. The blue line is the annexation wall, with the yellow sections in the planning stage and the red sections currently under construction. The wall deviates extensively from the path of the Green Line, at some points as much as 22 kilometers. If the current plans for the construction of the wall are completed, hundreds of thousands of Palestinians will be living between the Green Line and the wall, in the so-called seam zone, including approximately 250,000 residents of East Jerusalem. An even greater number of Israeli citizens living in over 100 illegal settlements constructed inside the OPT, including 192,000 settlers living in East Jerusalem, will find themselves on the western side of the wall, fully integrated in practice into the State of Israel. The illegal settlements are shown on the map with the blue flags, and the Palestinian communities with red house icons. 7 years after initial construction began, the wall is still being built, with the length expected to reach 723 kilometers. Costing the Israeli taxpayer over $2 billion, the annexation wall is a dramatic symbol of intolerance and exclusion, and is effectively yet another means of annexing West Bank land. Built of high concrete slabs and razor wire, surveillance cameras and checkpoints, the annexation wall cuts through Palestinian villages, lands and communities and creates severe restrictions on freedom of movement, trade, access to health, education and livelihoods. This tour will highlight some of the human rights violations caused by the wall and focus on how 2 families in particular have been affected. This map shows how the annexation wall has been built in such a way that expropriates land from within the West Bank for the construction of settlements. When completed, only 13% of the wall will be built on the Green Line, with the remaining 87% built on West Bank land. This deviation from the path of the Green Line exposes the security justification of the wall as a myth designed to obscure Israel's deliberate and systematic policy of annexation of land and water resources. The blue flags show where the settlements have been built between the 1967 line and the annexation wall. There are at least 149 settlements in the West Bank, including East Jerusalem, despite their illegality under international law. Over the past 6 years, residents of Bethlehem have had to live with the concrete wall up to 10 meters high surrounding the northern part of the city, almost entirely closing off nearby Jerusalem. The wall cuts off the town from the farmland to the north, depriving many of the residents of their livelihoods. While residents are reliant on a sequence of gates and checkpoints to cross into their land only meters away, Israeli settlers enjoy access to bypass roads connecting the settlements in the area. Palestinians who remain trapped between the wall and the Green Line are forced to spend hours every day passing through checkpoints in order to enter Bethlehem. Israeli-issued permits are essential for crossing the complex network of gates and checkpoints, restricting Palestinians' freedom of movement. These permits are a particular obstacle for farmers whose land now lies suffocated between the Green Line and the wall. They must apply for a visitor permit to access their own land. The neighbourhood around Rachel's tomb, the acclaimed burial spot of the Old Testament matriarch, has been carved up by the wall, designed to control access to the site for tourists coming from Israel. This has resulted in the home of the Anastas family being surrounded on three sides by a 12-metre-high concrete wall. Their every move is monitored using CCTV cameras, and their friends and family are afraid to visit. The wall has been built very close to the house, allowing little sunlight to reach it. The Anastas family have been warned by Israeli soldiers that if they go on their roof, they will be shot. Similar threats have been made against the children, forbidding them from playing in front of the house. We will now see how the lives of another family living in the Qalqilia area, north of Jerusalem, have been even more gravely affected by the annexation wall. As you can see, this section of the wall was clearly designed to appropriate land for settlements. The Palestinian village of Mesha has been particularly affected by their construction. When the wall is completed, nearly 95% of the village's land will have been expropriated or partitioned by the wall. As the map shows, Mesha and the neighbouring villages will be completely cut off from the rest of the West Bank, except for a narrow corridor to the east. The construction of the Elkanah settlement in the late 1970s initially took about 2,000 dunams of Mesha land. The construction of the annexation wall appropriated even more land for the settlement, fertile land planted with olive trees or cultivated with vegetables and greenhouses. The absurdity of Israel's discriminatory and exclusionist policies is exemplified in the case of the Amir family. In 2003, they were told their house was to be demolished so the annexation wall could be built on their lands. When they refused, the wall was constructed on three sides of their home, cutting the family off from Mesha village and from the settlement of Elkanah. The Amir family have been harassed and threatened by the Israeli military and by settlers, and have had their property destroyed on several occasions in an effort to force them to leave their home. This gate is the only point of entry to the family's home. When the gate was first installed, the family were told they would have access for only 15 minutes each day. The family refused, and following a protracted fight with the Israeli authorities, were eventually given the key to the gate. This gate to the south is controlled by the Israeli military and leads to the land annexed by the wall. Military vehicles pass through this gate and along the road meters from the Amir home on a daily basis. This is the entrance to the Elkanah settlement. The Amir family suffer from routine abuse and harassment from the settlers whose homes overlook their house. The family own agricultural land on the other side of the settlement. However, they are not permitted to pass through this gate. They must travel a long distance around the village, making it very difficult to maintain their land. Like so many other Palestinian families and communities in this area between the annexation wall and the Green Line, the Amir family finds itself in unwitting defiance of the entire expansionist policy of the Israeli state. As this tour has shown, the building of the wall on Palestinian land, the severe restrictions on movement resulting in loss of livelihoods, and the expansion of the settlements are tactics being employed by the Israeli occupying power to fragment Palestinian existence in the area. Al-Haq have recorded short films about the Anastas and Amir families. They are available to view on our YouTube channel. Al-Haq's report, The Annexation Wall and its Associated Regime, can be found in the publications section of our website at alhaq.org, where you can also find more virtual field visits like this one. You can also follow Al-Haq on Facebook.
All right, I'll switch quickly to a more focused video that is going to take us into the area of business and human rights, but I wanted to start with these contextual videos to put you in the setting, and then we can have the discussion afterwards.
Welcome to this virtual field visit from Al-Haq, part of a series focusing on the topic of business and human rights. This video will highlight corporate complicity in the exploitation of natural resources through quarrying in the occupied West Bank. Firstly, we will see how the Israeli authorities have dispossessed Palestinians of extensive portions of their territory, depriving them of the possibility of benefiting from its natural resources. Over 60% of the West Bank has been designated as Area C, under full Israeli civil and security control. Vast portions of the area have been appropriated by the Israeli authorities for settlements, industrial zones, and agriculture. In addition, large swathes have been declared to be state land, and so placed under the legal control of Israel as the occupying power. Finally, the annexation wall, the building of which in the West Bank was declared to be illegal by the International Court of Justice in 2004, cuts through Palestinian villages, lands, and communities, creating severe restrictions on freedom of movement, trade, access to health, education, and livelihoods. Israeli companies have been extracting minerals at a commercial scale from quarries located within the occupied Palestinian territory since the mid-1970s. At present, there are 9 active quarries in Area C, owned either by Israeli or international companies. On average, around 3/4 of their yield is transferred directly to the Israeli market. One such quarry is Nahal Raba, close to the Green Line south of Qarqilia. This quarry is owned by a British company called Hanson, which in turn is owned by Heidelberg, a German company and a world leader in cement and aggregate production. The quarry exploits Palestinian natural resources for the benefit of the Israeli construction industry. Hanson also owns 2 concrete plants in Israeli settlements and has supplied construction material to the expansion of the Barkan settlement industrial zone. A further example is Yatir, a quarry in the South Hebron Hills, which is part owned by Readymix, the Israeli subsidiary of the Mexican company Cemex, another large international construction firm. Readymix also owns plants in various Israeli settlements and industrial zones across the West Bank, and has provided materials for the construction of the annexation wall and its associated regime. Under international law, Israel, as the occupying power, is prohibited from exploiting the natural resources of the occupied Palestinian territories for the economic benefit of Israel and its nationals. However, this footage clearly shows materials being removed from the Nahal Raba quarry in the West Bank and transported into Israel. In December 2011, the Israeli High Court of Justice ruled that Israel's quarrying activities in the OPT could continue, arguing that since the quarries contribute to the Palestinian economy, banning their activities would likely harm the occupied population. In reality, the quarries only provide employment opportunities to around 200 Palestinian workers, while the royalties and leasing fees paid by the Israeli quarry companies have been used by the Israeli civil administration to provide public services to Israeli settlements. As such, the Israeli courts have legalized the exploitation of Palestinian natural wealth and resources. These quarrying companies are being allowed to freely exploit Palestinian mineral wealth, while Palestinians, due to the restrictions placed by Israel upon planning and construction in Area C, have been denied meaningful utilization of their land. The court has, in effect, paved the way for the pillage of natural resources in the occupied Palestinian territory and obstructed the Palestinian right to self-determination, in clear violation of international law.
Okay, welcome back. So I hope those videos gave you a glimpse of the reality on the ground. Now I want to take us a little bit further back and assess how we got here into the context of the situation in Palestine today, and the role of businesses and the area of business and human rights and how we are addressing it within the Palestinian context. So it's important to look back at history and remember the historical origins of colonialism and the role that corporations played within the colonial process. And this was very much within the mindset of Zionists in the early stages of Theodor Herzl's vision of the failure of philanthropic colonization and the importance of developing colonialism along business lines, very much modeling the efforts of Cecil Rhodes in South Africa and the British South Africa Company. And we see a lot of the parallels in the discussions today about the apartheid situation in the Palestinian context. And it's clear that there is a lot more parallel when you look back at the history of colonialism and the colonial legacy that has been carried forward within the Palestinian context. And I found this article, this piece very interesting during my archival research, titled "The Colonization of Palestine: Means and Methods." And it was a very clear indication that even in the, prior to World War II and the discussions around the colonization of Palestine, there was still a discussion under the British mandate about how the Jewish agency would be pursuing the ends of colonialism within the Palestinian context. And the quote that I have here is a question that asks, what medium should be employed to colonize a country on a large scale? Should it be done by philanthropy or treated as a business proposition along strict business lines? And this was a proposition in a document by David Levantin. And it's important to remember also that within the Palestinian context, it's very similar to other contexts of colonialism and the quest for natural resources and trade routes. But here in Palestine, we had the issue of oil being discovered within the Middle Eastern region, and the desire to pump oil from Kirkuk, Haifa from Kirkuk, Iraq to Haifa, Palestine, was in discussion even prior to World War I. And that contributed to the importance of Palestine geopolitically. That, coupled with the Suez Canal, raised the significance of Palestine in terms of trade and energy resources. And after the occupation in 1967, despite the evolution of international law, the role of corporations continued to play an instrumental role in the continued process of colonizing within occupied territory under the umbrella of occupation. And this led to the creation of the Israel Corporation in 1968. And the idea was to create a new company that would promote the development of basic branches of the economy using business practices, but very much connected to the exploitative continuing colonization of Palestine. And it was very similar to the modern day Crown Charter Company, like the British South Africa Company of the past. And over time, you had other developments where the Israeli government would create a private insurance company to provide political risk insurance for construction of settlements in the territory. That, followed by the discovery of natural gas in 1999, increased the significance of Palestine and also had an impact on the potential for a just and peaceful solution, because the discovery of natural gas also created another incentive for Israel to control all of the occupied territory, despite its so-called withdrawal from the Gaza Strip. And so we see over the last 100 years, the role that natural resources have played in the colonization of Palestine and the impact that it has had on the Palestinian people. And we've gone from oil prior to World War I to the issue of natural gas being an important factor today. There are other issues at play here. The minerals of the Dead Sea. You see the Dead Sea is a very mineral-rich resource, and part of the Dead Sea is in occupied Palestinian territory being exploited by Israeli corporations for the benefit of the Israeli economy, to the level of the individual elements within the minerals in the Dead Sea, all having a significant economic benefit to the Israeli economy and various Israeli corporations. And here you get a sense of the various pillars of the exploitation of the Palestinian territory and how Israel controls the people and the resources to benefit its various sectors, all to different levels, but it's all very much connected to Israel's economic system of colonization. And so as we get to where we are today, and we see over the course of history the globalization and the privatization of national companies, all playing an important role in the development and sort of the evolution of the colonization of Palestine and the role that corporations have been playing. And within the Palestinian context, it's important to note that it's a multinational colonial endeavor, because Israel controls the territory, but it relies on multinational involvement of corporations from different parts of the world to fulfill those colonial ambitions, which is somewhat different from the previous colonial mechanism, where the companies were very much directly connected to the colonizing country. Recently, we've seen developments within the UN to try to create a database of the various corporations that are involved in different industries. And we see some of those in the UN database. It's a very small amount of the actual amount of companies that are involved, but it gives you a snapshot of the various corporations and the areas that they're involved in. And you see the different countries that they might be registered or operating as a home base, but a lot of them are Israeli companies, because the Israeli economy is very much connected to the Israeli political policy of colonization and control and exploitation. One of the issues that we try to do within Al-Haq is to challenge corporations and their involvement using the legal mechanisms that are available. And we see one example that I want to show here is a case that we tried to bring in the Netherlands against a Dutch construction company for its involvement in the construction of the wall and settlements. And it started off with footage being collected by a Dutch film crew that showed this company's operations. And then we started collecting more information on the company and its involvement. And in cooperation with Dutch civil society and a Dutch lawyer, submitted a complaint to the Dutch prosecutor. And it actually led to the raid of the offices of the company. But after some delays, eventually the prosecutor decided not to move forward with an investigation. And the reason for doing so was that they felt the evidence that of the involvement in proportion to the total construction of the wall was not sufficient. And they also raised the issue of the unlikelihood of cooperation from the Israeli authorities. So this shows the challenges that we face in even trying to bring these kind of cases. But nevertheless, it's important to continue to pursue these kind of cases, whether it's criminal that we have done in the Netherlands or in Switzerland, or civil cases that have been brought in the US and Canada and France, all about challenging the economic incentive structure and the links that are created between Israel's colonial policies and their settlement enterprise and the foreign corporations that are involved in contributing to the development of these policies and implementing on the ground. Now, it's important also to keep in mind that the law plays one part within the broader social system and the different connections that are made, and we have to explore all these avenues in looking at international law, domestic law, the national interests, individual interests, environment, culture, politics, All these things are very much interconnected, and we try to take these things into account as we engage and use international law as a tool to challenge the colonization of Palestine and the economic actors that are involved in and benefiting from this continuing colonization of Palestine. So I'll stop my presentation here and open the floor for questions. I'll turn it over to our moderator now. Thank you for listening. I hope I wasn't too quick.
Okay, for now, I think we don't have any question. So if you don't have anything to add, so we can finish it.
Well, it's been a pleasure. I see if there are no questions, I'm happy to conclude now. If you want to give 5 minutes for people to process and then come back with questions. At the same time, you are able to reach us through our email and follow up as you like. Bye-bye.
Okay, thank you very much for your lecture.
Thank you. Bye-bye.